Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Cohen, and on today's episode, I have Bill Patterson. Bill is a clinical hypnotherapist and psychotherapist based near Melbourne, Australia. His areas of particular interest include stress and anxiety management, phobias and addictions, along with chronic pain management. Bill is also a member and clinical supervisor with the Australian Hypnotherapists Association. Bill, thanks so much for coming on to today.
My pleasure, Gary. Thank you for having me.
So, as I introduced you, you're a hypnotherapist and you're my first hypnotherapist on the show. And I'm really looking forward to this because I do have a particular interest in mind and mental health. And after speaking with one of your colleagues or someone that you work with, Dr. Daniel Lewis, he was on a previous episode, I thought I have to get you on because you could definitely explain to listeners what is hypnotherapy, how it works, and compare it to some other modalities. So I'm so excited to get you onto today. And I was wondering to begin with then, to introduce listeners, if you could just give maybe a little definition of what is hypnotherapy?
What is hypnotherapy?
Mm-hmm.
It's the use of hypnosis to help someone make a change, basically. It's probably the original psychotherapy back in the time of Anton Mesmer in the 1800s. And you had two choices in those days. You either went to the doctors for bloodletting and very painful medical treatment, or you might try hypnosis or mesmerism, as it was called in those days. And a lot of people gravitated to mesmerism, and which was a form of psychotherapy, of being able to manipulate or persuade or encourage someone to take on a new perspective for their mental health or well-being or physical ailments, which often can be substantially improved through hypnotherapy.
I didn't actually.
Yep, sorry.
So, no, I didn't quite realize. So that's where the word mesmerized comes from.
Yes, it was a theory that Mesmer had, that by magnetizing certain devices and bringing people closer to the magnetic force, and as he was making suggestions, they realized miraculous cures. And he was debunked by the scientific community. One of them was Benjamin Franklin, as a matter of fact, the American politician and devotee in the sciences of those days. And that was the end of Mesmer's career. And then it sort of went dormant, but it wasn't until the century after that I realized that it wasn't really magnetism, but the power of the suggestion that was important.
Okay. And that's what hypnosis is then, is the power of suggestion.
Hypnosis has the potential to, through the power of suggestion, make changes that are still, in many situations, quite mysterious. So it has a sort of an aura about it, but then it's perhaps some of that aura is lost to the stage hypnotist, where you see spectacular instant change of personality or state, and so it lacks a bit of credibility, I think, in terms of the serious clinical application of hypnosis.
And I guess that is what maybe a lot of people think of hypnosis as, the stage performance side of the hypnosis versus what you do, which is a clinical hypnosis. Is it the same hypnosis? It is hypnosis as hypnosis. There's only one type of hypnosis.
It's an important question. It is, if you like, it's the same hypnosis. We all have this capacity, almost all of us, probably very minor exceptions, all have a capacity to go into trance to alter our state of consciousness. And with hypnosis, the mind becomes far more sensitized to suggestion, and this can be traced in these very sophisticated technologies now, brain science, with fMRI scanners and quantity VEG. The locations of the brain that respond to suggestion have become quite activated in hypnosis, where they may not in ordinary conversation. So there's a there's quite a large body of evidence and interest in hypnotherapy because it offers a lot of advantages that the orthodox medical model doesn't, particularly the non-use of medication that might have detrimental side effects.
So it sounds like hypnosis lights up or unlocks different areas of your brain, and that's what's occurring in this process. Is that basically?
There's three. In order to describe hypnosis, there are three areas that are usually identified with the trance state. One is that you'll be dissociated. That means if I said to you that you're probably not aware of your bottom as you're sitting on it until I mention it, you are dissociated from that. Your brain is filtering out a lot of inputs, billions of inputs every second of your waking consciousness, and this dissociation is a significant factor in a hypnotic trance because you start to narrow your attention generally inwardly to an inward world, and so you're very focused, and the extraneous and the critical factors of your conscious thinking are far less involved. So it's dissociative. And then the second element is absorption, where you become so focused. A very good example of that might be Aldous Huxley, the great literary giant of the last century, who was very interested in consciousness and wrote books such as Doors of Perception and Brave New World. And he could focus on an object in a room and everything else would disappear. That's how intense his concentration was. So that's absorption. And there were quite a number of famous meetings between him and another giant of hypnotherapy, Milton Erickson, an American psychiatrist who spent almost his entire life in psychiatry using hypnosis. And in fact, a very large body of hypnosis is named after Erickson. So if you're an Ericksonian, it's understood that you follow the strategies that Milton Erickson employed. So that's that second element. And then the third element, that's absorption. You become so focused inwardly that nothing else matters. And the third element is your hypersuggestibility, the areas of the brain that have been identified as likely to be involved in taking suggestions and influencing behaviour, altering our senses, have all been observed to become far more activated in hypnosis, whereas in a practice such as meditation or a more passive contemplative practice, that's quite different.
And I was going to ask you that, yeah, because what you're describing there, those three main elements, that you are disassociated, you're focused, and then the suggestibility. It sounds like the suggestibility element is what's different, a big difference between hypnosis and meditation. That because in meditation you're not susceptible to suggestion, are you?
Well, that's not the case either. I don't think. Now, it's a difficult area, but a lot happens in the brain. A lot of what shall we say, brain coherence and restoration in the processes of the brain occurs in meditation when you're literally doing nothing. And I'm talking about a practice where you more or less become the observer of any phenomena, any activity. An open meditation is one where you're just tracking all of your senses, the sensory input, and being exposed to that without any commentary or judgment or dialogue. You're just in this witnessing state, if you like. And in that, it's been shown, there's been some very interesting work in the last 20 years from Richard Davidson in the United States, showing that increased activity in the left prefrontal cortex from sessions of meditation, mindfulness meditation, and the increase in positive attribution in the brain is very significant, because it has benefits for those who are suffering anxiety and in particular depression. So they've shown that people who learn to meditate and to focus in a mindful way get measurable benefit from the practice.
Okay. So, because that's another point after speaking with Dr. Lewis, and because he's got the Pathways to Meditation guide, and I believe you worked in conjunction with him to develop that program. And after speaking with him there, it got me thinking, could you use hypnotherapy to help someone who's struggling to meditate as like a base, kind of like, because I did an experiment with neurofeedback training. So I had the cap on the head and went through all the training, and I found doing that made it easier for me to meditate. It's like it you use it as a foundation to lift your mental health or like energy levels, so that you have that maybe awareness factor. And I'm wondering, that it got me thinking too, could you use hypnotherapy as a way to help enhance your meditation?
Yes, you can, and I think it's an ideal way to fast track yourself into what we say a practice of meditation where you can feel confident that you're actually meditating. A lot of people will be sitting in a chair or in a lotus position or by the banks of a river and walk away from that experience saying, well, I wonder if I was meditating. I seem to be thinking all the time, or I seem to be preoccupied with things. But one of the phenomenon in both meditation and when you're in a hypnotic trance is there are certain signs. For example, you have an alteration of proprioception. Your limbs can feel heavier or lighter, or longer or shorter. A typical susceptibility test in hypnosis is an arm levitation, where you suggest to the client that their hands might go up and then we'll just let it go down again, and I wonder if it'll float up all by itself again, and all of a sudden it's floating up. But the subject is not willing it or seemingly making it happen. It's happening involuntarily, and that's clearly a trance phenomenon.
Okay, and that's how you, as the hypnotherapist, could have one way of knowing the patient, the client, is definitely hypnotized. Because
yes, it's an important question. It's really helpful to first of all for yourself to know that the client's in trance, and then it's even more helpful for the client to know. And because they're still aware, you're going to be still aware. There are certain depths or states potentially where you can easily develop spontaneous amnesia, and you can forget the content of the session. And that can be useful when you're dealing with difficult or distressing circumstances. That can be when sort of some trauma appears, and it might be helpful to sort of separate that trauma at that particular time. That person is not going to be able to make a full resolution of that at that point. Mm-hmm. Although in hypnosis it can be extremely helpful to defuse trauma and to be able to help people through distressing circumstances.
And so another common question I see a lot when it comes to hypnotherapy is that, can everyone be hypnotized?
Yes, it is a common question, but there's a multitude of answers to it. Look, there's a generally recognised fact that most people can be hypnotized, because as soon as you're daydreaming or as soon as you're preoccupied with something, driving a car and then you wonder how you got to your destination, or you might be involved in a piece of music or a movie of some sort, and you're so absorbed in that nothing else around you you have any awareness of anything in the peripheral, then you're in that state of trance. You're in a state of absorbed, altered state of consciousness, and that applies to most people. But there is quite a big distinction between the ability of individuals. Some people have and then it becomes a trait. Some people are much more hypnotizable. Some people are highly hypnotizable. Others, it's hardly hypnotizable. So there's just sort of a spectrum. But 2/3 of the adult population can be hypnotized and successfully to make a change, and almost all children are hypnotizable.
Okay, so as adults, we seem to filter that suggestion part, or the person trying to hypnotize us. But with kids, it's easy. You say it's easier to hypnotize a child.
Yes, children seem to be more open and perhaps less pragmatic or skeptical or questioning, because as soon as you start questioning a trance and saying, well, this is not real, well, you're going to be right, it's not real.
Okay, and so that would be one of the blockers as to why someone struggles to get hypnotized, because they could be listening to the hypnotherapist and thinking, no, this is a load of junk, or what's going on, or that questioning, that busy mind is actually blocking them from being hypnotized. So it sounds like it's easier to hypnotize a child.
Yes, there's far less, I guess, skepticism or pragmatism. And I think there's, in our younger years, we're far more engaged with our imagination. We're far more, perhaps, absorbed as we're learning new information, as we're building up our neural structures, which are still growing until about 17 at an astonishing rate, that we're taking in so much. A childlike wonder or curiosity is obviously a good basis for hypnosis.
And so when you were mentioning earlier, I think a lot of people can relate to that, where they're driving to work and they've got a 40-minute drive or an hour and a half drive, and there's a large portion on the highway or motorway they just don't remember because they were so engaged or focused on something else. And you're saying that's a little bit like being hypnotized. Is it because you're in that trance-like state?
Well, you're in that very absorbed state, and even more readily identifiable absorption would be devices such as phones and computers and television, but particularly devices, because you can see people everywhere now around the world walking across streets, up footpaths, and with their heads down and focused, and probably lost a considerable capability of judging time and alerting themselves to look up. So, we're seeing a new era in absorption.
Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, when people are using their phones, they're actually in a slight trance-like state.
Yes.
Okay. And how long does it take to become hypnotized? So you're saying that 2/3 of people can become hypnotized, and given some examples of what it's like in that trance-like state, but does it take a long time to hypnotize someone? I know this is probably going to be a spectrum again, but generally, does it take hours or minutes? I'd be interested.
But it's usually someone who's highly hypnotizable, for example. It can, in less than a minute, 30 seconds, and you can use a rapid induction and someone will go straight into trance.
Wow, that fast.
Yes, and they have that ability to switch, and that's what you'll see in a stage hypnosis. Have you seen a stage hypnosis program where the stage hypnotist will invite members of the audience to come up? And so there's a stampede for the audience from people who would like to be noticed, and which the hypnotist knows and makes almost guarantees the success of the show, because the people are, first of all, motivated. So one of the factors in hypnosis is to be motivated to be hypnotized. If you're uncertain, or if you're fearful, or if you're doubtful, and you don't establish a confidence that you're going to have some degree of control, then you're going to be very difficult to hypnotize. But the people who rush up on the stage are motivated, and then he'll give them a rapid induction. He'll give them a susceptibility test. He'll see who can be hypnotized and who won't be. So he might say, in a moment I'm going to snap my fingers or count 1, 2, 3, and then he'll go straight to sleep, and he'll shout the word sleep or emphasize the word sleep, or tap someone's shoulder and they'll go to sleep. And these are rapid inductions. These are people that are genuinely going into hypnosis. But of those people on the stage, a percentage of them won't be hypnotized. They'll still be quite self-conscious. They'll be fully aware of their surroundings. They'll be either pretending to comply with the hypnotist's instructions, or they'll break out with a bit of self-consciousness and find themselves wandering back from the stage down to their seat, or the hypnotist will invite them to return to the audience. So he will know that 5 or 6 people out of that group of 20 perhaps are hypnotizable, and then that's where the show takes off, because he's confident of working with that cohort, or he or she.
Mm-hmm.
There are very good female stage hypnotists who understand these processes. But what's happening to the subject, of course, is they're thinking, well, he or she wants me to act like a chicken, and they can start flapping their arms about and clucking like a chicken around the stage, something they wouldn't normally do, and their friends would be most impressed because they haven't seen them act like this before, but they're actually disinhibited, so they lose a degree of self-consciousness. So they don't mind acting like a chicken. It's not a problem. They're not laughing because they're in an altered state. Mm-hmm. So that impresses the audience because they know something's actually happened, can't explain what, and the hypnotist knows how to exploit this and make it humorous and entertaining.
So that's the rapid induction method that you were talking about there to get people to be hypnotized quickly on stage. But now you were also saying that there's people where they struggle to get hypnotized. How does it work there? Are you still able to work with those people, but it just takes weeks or days or months or like a training process? How does that work?
Well, this is an interesting question because it's not really a struggle. It's just the characteristic or the trait of that individual, the hypnotizability that determines how you approach it. Now, a lengthy, long-winded, incredibly drawn-out relaxation technique may not be appropriate for many people at all, but that's sometimes seen as hypnosis is relaxation, but it's far from that. You're activating quite an intense level of internal awareness. But there are some techniques that are very useful to engage people in trance if a rapid induction isn't called for. And that's, you can use complex semantics to confuse someone into a state of trance so that the conscious mind becomes overwhelmed with competing ideas, a sort of a positive cognitive dissonance, if you like. And so the subject gives up trying to work it all out and then becomes absorbed in the trance experience. Or you can utilize, and this was the approach that Milton Erickson took in his life. He studied his patients very closely and used whatever they presented to him for their benefit. For example, if he had a young boy who couldn't control his temper and was stamping his foot a lot, this was a famous case study of his, he asked the boy to spend the next 10 minutes in his room stamping his foot until the boy got a bit sick of it, and then went straight into a nicely relaxed trance state, and Erickson was able to bring some ideas to the boy that could sort of help him overcome his anger. So that utilization of the characteristics of your client, patient, or subject, and there's a whole lot of techniques which come out of a sort of a creative way of helping someone into a trance state. As soon as you've got someone focusing on in the present moment, on their breathing, for example, which is probably the most common meditation object. When you're teaching meditation, you look to use the breath most usually as your focusing device. But it can be anything. In the people I work with who have chronic pain, we can actually use, in many instances, the pain itself as a focus. So it's how you use a focus. You can count down, you can climb or descend ladders and steps and lifts and elevators, and sort of suggest the idea of a depth, a greater depth. But ultimately, it's really a switching from your conscious mind into something that's far more occupied with a smaller area of interest. Okay. In other words, concentration.
And if I wanted to get more benefit, because I'm just thinking if I wanted to try hypnotherapy, but I'm worried that I could be wasting my time or money because it's hard for me to be hypnotized. Is there anything me as a client could do to help you as a therapist to make sure I get hypnotized faster? I'm just wondering, some people might think, do I need to practice meditation, or do I need to take some sort of pill or nootropic or something to make sure that I get the best out of this experience?
I think the best preparation is to provide as much information to the therapist as you can that's relevant to the problem that you're wanting to change. And that it will include the background, what led up to it, how long you've had the situation. That sort of information, the information gathering is quite important. And then the therapist can then start to look at the word structures that the client's using. The linguistics, the semantics are very influential for how our brain reacts to our various senses. So you can use that quite effectively with that sort of information. But there's not really much, there may be for some, I don't know, but not really much scope for sitting at home rehearsing before you go to make sure you get the most out of the session.
Okay.
I think really it's just bring your life into the session. And if you feel that it's not for you, or you can't be hypnotized, or you told the hypnotist you were in such a wonderful trance, but when you went home you didn't think anything happened, then that's not unusual. But quite often you'll find something does happen, or even when you think it didn't, it did. So there's so many nuances or mysteries to this field that no 2 days are the same for a therapist.
So we've talked about what it is, how easy or not easy it is to get people into hypnotic state. Let's go into some of the benefits of hypnotherapy then, and hypnosis. So this is beyond the stage stuff now, other than having a good laugh for a little moment of time. A common one, I know hypnosis for, is like smoking cessation. So to stop people from smoking, and then dealing with pain, as you mentioned too. Are those some of the common reasons why someone would want to see a hypnotherapist?
I think smoking is most commonly associated with hypnosis, although the studies show that it's possibly no more successful than some of the other medical approaches, or just helping someone who's given up a few times and relapsed to just continue to persevere. It is a very difficult addiction, and there are certainly a cohort of people who can come to hypnosis and never smoke again, and I think every hypnotherapist will be always buoyed by that. But I think the biggest issue for hypnotherapy is stress, management of stress, because it's such a fast and powerful way of switching the autonomic nervous system into a more parasympathetic response, where you're going to be almost eliminating all of the highly active stress hormones, the cortisol and adrenaline, and the flight and threat and fear hormones completely subside in a very, very, very short amount of time in a session of clinical hypnosis. So that's a very important starting point, because it will generally be at the basis of whatever's wanting to be changed.
So it is very good for stress management. I mean, that's, as you said, so many of us have different levels of stress. But if someone is listening and they feel they can't get their stress levels under control, or panic, if it gets to that stage, then hypnotherapy is an option for them.
It's a very effective tool, particularly for anxiety states and panic disorders, which are triggered by constant anxiety. But what I'm getting at here is that hypnosis has a way of being able to invoke very quickly, releasing and letting go. And you'll find in a session that 40 or 50 minutes of the session, the client is deeply relaxed. And this allows for a considerable amount of recovery for the body from the constrictions of whatever's happening with stress. When you're producing cortisol, all your blood vessels will constrict, your heart rate goes up, your breathing is far more rapid and shallow. All of these symptoms reverse in hypnosis. So it's very common for people to, if you measure blood pressure before you come into a session and when you leave, you'll see a noticeable difference, a noticeable balancing or lowering of your blood pressure.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you've also just got me thinking, when you were talking about traumas and anxieties, how maybe people don't know how to talk about it with traditional therapy. They struggle to verbalize the issue. When someone goes through a hypnotherapy session and you're dealing with a phobia or a panic attack, an anxiety issue, are you still requiring the client to have to speak about it? It's just that you've lowered the inhibition to talk about it, or that they would know what to talk about? Is that how they end up dealing with it?
If hypnosis is often used for regression to help take someone back to distressing circumstances, particularly if they were victims of some sort of abuse. And with victimization, there's often a natural tendency of the brain or the mind to partition that off so that it's not going to affect everyday life. But some people can carry that trauma into their adult life and affects them very negatively. So there is something relieving and cathartic in being able to acknowledge that, and there's a fine line between that and re-traumatization. So PTSD is a difficult one, but I can't imagine anyone overcoming trauma without going through the process and experiencing it. Okay. And I know from my own personal case in trauma that by repeating the circumstances over and over again, I was able to diffuse the trauma that I experienced, and that was putting the theory to the test, so to speak. So regression can be very helpful to go back, but you can't just leave it hanging in the air. There needs to be a process of integration. The stronger components of someone's personality or states can take over and be more nurturing. Compassion is a very important part of self-healing, and ego strengthening, building up your sense of self so that you can see that you're worthwhile. These are all components of working with trauma, and there are many more approaches, but hypnosis is very effective at going into it. And so one of my very first clients 25 years ago, who came to see me she couldn't quite pinpoint what the problem was, but it was affecting her in her adult life. And in fact, she was suffering from anorgasmia. She couldn't reach sexual climax in a relationship with a husband, and she felt the marriage was in peril. And she asked my wife if I could help her. And my wife said, "Yes, Bill can help you." And I had no idea what anorgasmia was. But strangely enough, in that session, when she came to see me, a lot of these past memories came up, some which she hadn't consciously remembered for almost her entire life. And she was able to get a sort of a realization of why certain things happened. It was to do with her mother and her mother's instability as an inpatient in a psychiatric ward and an attempted suicide. There were some very traumatic and difficult circumstances for her as a very young child. And strangely enough, this had connected to her senses of an adult in her marriage and in some way or another. And she rang my wife a week or two later to say, just to tell Bill it happened. And I'm assuming that she was freed from the restrictions that she'd had previously. Wow. But that was a fairly dramatic transformation for her. But it came about by that catharsis, that huge bringing forward of the painful and distressing events which had sort of been pushed aside or suppressed, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, and that's that word suppression there, because that's what I'm thinking about. So they come to you saying they have this issue, which has got nothing to do with their childhood, and then you put them through the hypnotherapy session and you put them into a state of hypnosis. Do they then just reveal this, or is it that you have a template that you always take someone back to their childhood years and just sort of probe and ask certain questions to see if something is revealed?
Well, my way of thinking, that would be quite inappropriate to take every client back to their childhood to see if there's something originating event. Now, there may well be, for all of us, some originating event for some characteristic of our life or our personality. But if there's a blockage, if there's something that's really presenting a challenge in someone's life, and they're wanting and they're willing to go back, I'd certainly help them. And there's many ways of doing that without verbalising it. It doesn't have to be articulated to a therapist. There's a process where you can allow the client to do this completely subconsciously and work through it. And the content of those memories doesn't have to be brought forward into the conscious mind. It just seems to help in certain cases. Other cases, you might say, well, when you have this particular problem, where do you feel it in your body? And typically someone might feel it in the way they clench their jaw or a constriction in their chest. And so in hypnosis, you go back to the very first time you ever felt that constriction in your chest. And that regression can sometimes swiftly take that person back to a significant event, which once appraised and evaluated can be liberating for their particular situation.
So talking about all this regression into the hurtful areas of our lives, as you said, there's a fine line between acknowledging those events and then actually re-traumatizing the person. Is that one of the risks involved in hypnosis? Is that if where we need the therapist, the person who's doing the hypnosis on us, to know where that line is, to not sort of cause that re-traumatization issue?
Yeah, I think that the key to that issue, and that could be true of any therapy, if you're uncovering trauma from the past, is to ensure that the client is comfortable with the pace that you're approaching. For example, I had a client last year who came for 8 or 10 consecutive sessions, and nothing was obvious. I want to go back and find out what had happened. And she had felt that one of her family members had molested her. But and we had 8 attempts to go back there, and there was nothing. And she said, "Well, I can't see anything. There's nothing. I've got this feeling that I'm sure there's something there." And then in that final session, she went to an event that was completely unrelated to the one that she thought was the original set of circumstances. And it was a very nasty sexual assault on a picnic somewhere, and totally different people that weren't connected with her family at all. And she was quite devastated by that memory, and she was able to identify who that perpetrator was, who had since died. But she had spoken with other friends to find out the identity of that person after all those years. But what was interesting is that she no longer had that fear or concern that something was wrong within her family, and that was very helpful for her.
Okay, so that was the liberation that she got there, is actually thinking, well, knowing that what this feeling was real, something was there was this memory, and that it was, and then unlocking that blockage she had with her family, which would have been good for her.
And she's reported that she's feeling a lot more happy and confident in her relationship. She was socially phobic. She was an intelligent, well-presented woman who had lived with very difficult memories or difficult, vague impressions of her past, and that seems to be all over now.
Okay. And so we've talked a lot about helping clients with traumas and phobias and anxieties. for someone who feels, hey, I think I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me that I'm trying to particularly address with, would you see any benefit for someone doing hypnotherapy for sort of executive function, just to be a better person in some way? If someone runs their own business, they want to have good mental health and good mental strength. Would you say, I guess I've answered my own question here, because you talked about stress management. Even someone who doesn't have an issue, they could somehow benefit from hypnotherapy just for general stress management. And if so, in that case, what I'm trying to think of is practically, is it just like I could come for one session a month, or one session every 2 months or something, just to sort of top up my brain health in a way? Is that an option?
That's a very typical presentation. People can go to hypnotherapy for performance improvement, and whether it's public speaking, it might start as fear of public speaking, but then to develop a competency perhaps, or they can unlock some of the fears and inhibitions that they have, and find more of their human side, which can help with their presentation. Or sporting, I've had quite a number of sporting people who can be helped through just focusing their mind to stay present and get into the zone in these elite sports is a critical factor. Almost every excellent sporting character is looking at these opportunities of strengthening their mental capacities too. And a good example of that is Jason Day, the Australian golfer, and he sets himself up before every shot. He was number one in the world for a couple of years ago, and he's now coming back with some more success. But he's been very consistent with staring at the ball, closing his eyes, visualising where the ball's going to go, visualising the ball coming back to right in front of him, and then he hits it. That's a process of self-hypnosis. It's been well practiced with marathon runners, triathlons, cyclists. You get into the zone, so your body you can optimise the performance of your body by reducing the inhibition or the limitations that you believe your body is signalling, and you can find extraordinary extra reserves.
And so what you're talking about there sounds like the flow state, which athletes try to get into. And so is flow state a state of self-hypnosis?
Well, that's. I don't know if I could say it's the same as hypnosis. I think it's like meditation. Is meditation the same as hypnosis? They show that there are varying regions of the brain and distinctions between meditation and mindfulness or hypnosis. But I'm not sure about flow, and I've experienced it myself in my younger years in sport, getting into a zone once or twice only. I was certainly never capable of doing it very often, but I could feel it, and it was quite euphoric. There's no pain. You're just totally in another world, and there's no limitation. It doesn't matter what happens, you can't be stopped. It's just a total absorption. So it has all the hallmarks of being in a hypnotic state, but I don't know whether it is.
Okay. And so just to come up to the last little bit here that we've got with time-wise now, are there any other myths in hypnosis you would like to address for people who are now interested in doing it for different reasons, be it dealing with a trauma, a phobia, or even just performance training?
Well, it's one of the biggest myths, I think, and we've already covered it, with hypnosis, is that it's not a mind control. That you can't be controlled by someone else's mind. Under severe circumstances, there is a potential to be controlled. If you're totally helpless and you're fearful of someone who's showing aggression, you could be controlled without question. And they showed this in, I don't know if you read that book, The Manchurian Candidate, or the prisoners of war in the Korean War, who were all brainwashed for 3 or 4 years. And then when they came back to their home country, they they overcame that brainwashing over a number of years and regained their own senses. So there seems to be we're building networks all the time of our perceived reality, and it's unlikely that we can be influenced, but quite a different thing to be controlled by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
People think they may not come out of hypnosis. They might stay in hypnosis and not be able to get out of it. They might be stuck. And that's not possible either, because it's just like a sleep state. You go through a period of time when you can be absorbed, but there's some signaling in the brain that will bring you back to conscious awareness. You'll start to produce cortisol or some alerting hormone, and you're back again.
So you are always in control.
You're always in control. But even when you won't come out of a trance, but I've had clients who refuse to come out of a trance. They will sit there in the chair with their eyes closed, and I've got to beautiful count up to 3 and then open your eyes and you'll be wide awake, feeling refreshed, looking forward to the rest of the day, and to no avail. They're still lying comatose in the chair. Then I count to 10. I've even got to 20 at the odd occasion. And then I discovered there's a very quick way of being able to wake them up, because you can't, it's not helpful to touch a client while they're asleep or in a hypnotic state. So I tell them, look, they can stay there as long as they like, but they will have to pay another session fee. And that somehow that prompts them to come back to consciousness very quickly.
So that's a great tip for any up-and-coming hypnotherapists there. Use that one from Bill.
Well, yes, yeah. Others have used it too, I think, yeah. but it's a strange phenomenon. No one wants to come out of trance. It's a very peaceful, absorbing experience.
I can imagine. Well, I've learned so much about hypnotherapy today, hypnosis, and from what I can understand after listening with you today, it is a good thing to do, just to even try out for a spectrum of reasons, and no matter what age. It would definitely be an interesting experience, and I hope one day I can try hypnotherapy, because I'd just like to see what it feels like and maybe see what comes out of it too. Just that inquisitive mind of my own, and I can see health benefits, mental health benefits coming from it too. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all that information today. If anyone wants to follow you, find out more about your services, anything like that, do you have any links that you'd like to share for listeners?
Well, I have a website, which is very simply Mind Body Solutions, all one word, .com.au. So that's got all the information about the work that I do. Gary, I just want to say, if you're sort of threatening or sort of suggesting you might go and try out hypnosis, but my recommendation is if anyone wants to live a better life and a more connected life, then it's quite worthwhile to explore not only hypnosis but the exploding ubiquitous mindfulness and meditation movement all around the world. And there are so many apps now, so many courses, so many possibilities, but it's a very difficult thing to put yourself in a position either to meditate without being distracted and defaulting back to your normal levels of distraction, which of course are dominated now by screens. And we're losing the art of reading books, of connecting with nature and connecting with communities. And this is very clearly happening everywhere you look. And so we may have social media and connections, but all of this electronic digital connection is nothing compared to face-to-face and being out there in the real world. And I'm hoping that people who haven't tried or haven't explored the potential of meditation and don't judge it as a new age thing or a hippie thing to do, because it's got substantial medical evidence behind it now, really consider taking on a course and do training to help themselves. So they can see information about that on my website.
And also, as I mentioned earlier in the interview with Dr. Daniel Lewis, you did that meditation guide, part of that too. That's another option, isn't it? If they wanted to download something.
Yes. They've got a huge amount of resources on his website, on all the studies and techniques and all sorts of approaches that can be helpful.
Okay, fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much, Bill, for sharing all of that information. And yes, I won't, as you said, just threaten to do it. I will actually take action and do it.
Good. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Gary. Good on you.